Alrighty. Well, that's interesting. Why is that on there? Don't know why that's on there. Get me back to it. No idea. Alrighty. Welcome, everybody, to NycosRPG. This is a dark and cool summer night. Or, I guess it's not summer anymore, is it? No. October. Definitely not summer. Where have I been? Ah, at any rate, I am talking to a empty table, and I thought it would be an appropriate uh, conversation to have for tonight. So, if you are a game master and have experienced what I'm referring to as the empty table, I'm sorry. It's one of those things that happens that we have to do from time to time, and being able to look yourself in the mirror after you've spent the hours that you did developing and working on your project, and ah, I am no longer at the empty table. So the irony of having the empty table on a night when I have no empty table—that's very, very funny. So we are talking about the empty table, and it's a condition that doesn't happen every day. And most people only run into it rarely, and it's kind of an annoyance. But I thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about, and that is, how do we handle an empty table? I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master with 50 years of experience, and I'm here to help you make your games spectacular. So today we're going to be talking about those times when plans fall through. You had a particular specific event planned, you had confirmed several people to make sure that you were going to have enough at the table for the game to be a success. You made sure you had gotten a hold of that special miniature that is going to represent your big bad, and it's going to be just a grand evening. And then the phone calls begin. And, or worse, the phone calls don't begin, and it's nearing the time of beginning, the time that everybody agreed to get together, and you hear the sound of crickets from the other room because there's nobody here. And it's I'm also a grandparent, so when I speak of the empty table, I'm referring to something that perhaps is more understandable ish if you're a parent, because there's also the concept of the empty nest. Now, arguably, the empty table is far less significant because it's only a single event. We're talking about, we could just as likely be talking about, say, the end of a campaign, the final death throes of that group that tried to stick together over the years and found it increasingly difficult to plan your events to fall together. And I think that might be why tonight I particularly chose to go with the empty table, because I did have a group that was meeting on regular Fridays for a very long time. They had been on they'd been on Wednesday evenings at the local game store, and then they realized they could arguably save money by paying me directly, because that way I get cash, but I'd be having to come to their house, and then have to have the players, you know, owe me for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And so it was nowhere near as a stable group as others had been. But at least they'd gotten to where it was meeting every Friday like clockwork. And that group had been missing each session for, I think we were on our third month, when I finally, mentioned that, guys, maybe this group isn't meant to get together. We don't get to hold the events often enough. You're not able to be here as often as you would like. We did try to run some of the events in the in absentia using Discord, which other of my groups have done fine. I've had entire, games groups move all at once onto online, and all of a sudden everything was very, much more smooth because people didn't have to commit to babysitters and all of that kind of stuff. So the concept of going online wasn't itself a problem for this Friday group. It just their schedules just didn't mesh. The difficulties in getting people together is already tough enough, but when you're trying to do it for something that is arbitrary, is see if I get another screen up here. No, it's already set up there too. So there we go. So that'll go. The trick with an empty nest, there it is. The difficulty with an empty nest or a empty table is that sometimes we carry that load on our shoulders as if we had something to do with it, that it may have been something that we did. The difficulties of handling all of the pre-planning that was taken into account and all the intention that was included and not take it personally is actually sometimes difficult, because maybe there have been moments where things were a little rough in the session in the past. The brain starts to create and formulate all of these patterns based on everything that's going on, and we lay that back on our own shoulders. But an empty table has, I think, more directly to do with the ebb and flow of activity in our lives, and sometimes we take too much onto our plates. As a matter of fact, I bear if you aren't aware of this, my handle in the NycosRPG server and in other communities, I am Commander Clueless. Well, that name didn't derive by accident. Commander Clueless is what it was assigned to me by my friends, because in the past I was always so concerned with not having something going on that I would plan 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 things on the same weekend, expressly because I knew about the reality of fallout, that generally speaking, out of 3 things that get planned for the weekend, exactly one of them is going to actually come through. Now, most weekends you will have 1 or 2 that will actually, tentatively hold, and 1 or more persons has to kind of take the heat and say, I can't make it, and therefore it breaks. And so the idea of planning 2 and 3 things at a weekend was simply a way of avoiding a dead space. Life is too precious to waste any time. So if something's not going to hold, okay. And if you've got 3 things that are planning on being held, well, there were times when things would actually hold, and then I would be left, no pun intended, holding the bag, because I'm the one who has to say, I can't make it. And therefore, I was becoming undependable by being too dependable at putting things together. So I would, I'd orchestrate and engineer and say yes to 1,000 different things, and 3 of them would happen on the same night, and something would fall through, and it would be because I did it. Because I didn't want the empty table. I didn't want the quiet of a night. I wanted to make sure we had something going on every single session, potentially. So Therefore, the emblematic nature of an empty table when you are planning for something can be very rough to deal with. First thing to realize when you're dealing with an empty table is that it doesn't happen every week. It's a fluke. It's a one-off. More than likely, there's plenty of enough going on otherwise that you don't have to see it as anything other than that once in a million. And number two, maybe the reason the event didn't host was simply because you've been driving your players to fatigue. I've got one young lady who, if she had her opportunity to play, she would be at every game session. When I say young lady, you guys probably know I'm talking about Jean, bless her heart. She lives in Anaheim, which is 57 miles from the game store that we play at, and she will make that trek in a truck. And bless her heart, she's a school teacher in her heart, and you can see it in her bones. She's designed to be a school teacher. And if you have in your mental picture what a senior school teacher would look like, that's this young lady. She had diabetes, and so one of her feet got away from her, so to speak, and she had to have her foot removed. She occasionally will use a walker, but generally she doesn't even utilize that. She uses a walking cane sometimes, and sometimes she doesn't even use that. She'll just jump in her truck and come out, and for a long time she was running one session a week. Now she's talking about trying to find a way to come and play in both of the game store sessions because she literally can't get enough of the Nycos mechanism. And I'd like to take credit for being the reason for that because my stories are pretty compelling. But the reality is that if I wasn't there, she would still find another game session to play. And it's humbling to know that she'd go that far. But on a week when she doesn't show up, things are pretty rough. And I guess for me, my question for you is what is your resolution? How do you handle those empty table days? Now, for me, the real element of the empty table that has to be recognized, and I've mentioned it now twice, it isn't our fault. It isn't that you did something wrong that makes the table empty. I can only think of one time where I had a TPW. And those of you that are game masters with any time behind you, you're familiar with the TPK concept, the idea of a total party kill. That the adventure that you planned, the monsters were too strenuous, the monsters were too effective, your dice rolls were particularly good, and your players' dice were tanking. The idea of the game ending early because of a TPK is, while it's not common by any stretch, it's still often enough for just about every player to have a dozen or so stories of how the TPK occurred. And realistically, I've had 4 TPKs, but I've also had a TPW, and we'll come back to that in a minute. The emptiness that occurs because your game session got over early really can't count as an empty table. There's not a one of us that wouldn't take an hour of role playing if that was our choice. 1 hour or nothing, we'll take the hour every time, because the excitement and the thrill of the game is awesome, but it's far more about the community that develops with the regular attendees. Just about every ensemble cast television show has the concept of the ruined event happen, where they did get together and then something went awry or whatever. But when you realize that that the situation is going to happen with the TPK, generally speaking, you're so far into it you can't prevent it. It has to be played out. Yes, every single person at the table is going to be left with 0 hit points. Yes, you're going to have players that are going to be disappointed with you. They're going to be frustrated and feel like the game was rigged. There are going to be those that feel like they are taking on the blame because of something they did. And one of the three that I can distinctly remember, one of the players really fundamentally was at fault. The situation was under control. The players had the ability to try to effect an escape, but one player really honestly thought that the game master was going to save the party and did something incredibly irrational, and it did trigger a lethal response when the players did try to escape. But hey, there she is. Hey, Jean. I'm talking about her, and she shows up. Speak of the devil and speak the devil's name, and she shall appear. Let me get over here and look her up. All right, can you hear me, Jean?
Yes, I can.
All right, so can they. Just want to make sure. Go ahead and say hello again.
Hello, everybody.
Yep, yep, they can hear you. All righty. So we're talking about the empty table, and you've been gaming as long as I have. Can you remember the last empty table you faced, where you actually planned everything out, whether it be at your house or at someplace where you're going to, and when you got there, you were the only one?
No, because I usually gamed with friends and I went over to their house. And they were there and I was there and that's the way it worked.
Okay.
Honestly cannot. I have been to a table where there was just my sister and myself,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Because she DM'd and I was one of her players.
Mm-hmm.
But once you got started playing, other people says, come over and say, can we join?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, okay, what do you play and what do you have?
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't exactly the same system, he says we can make it work, you know,
Yeah.
because role playing is role playing. It isn't always just the stats on a piece of paper.
What?
You want to,
Huh?
you're,
That's crazy talk. You mean it's not just a piece of paper? It's not just a.
no, because we get to respond in Nikos as us in like real life. If and rather than just say I bluff, you get to try to bluff somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get to actually make that attempt and maybe learn how to bluff because the first couple times weren't so good.
Mm-hmm.
And your score might be good, but more than that, you're learning how to role play a person who can bluff, you know, come
Mm-hmm.
up with a good story to misdirect them. So in that way, it's extremely creative and expanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason I asked if you've ever had one, because in all the time that I've game mastered, there have been dozens of times when I've ended up being the only that I've either scheduled it wrong or did some poor planning or something, and I ended up being the only person. And
Yeah.
it's not a fun experience. You take it personally, and you think, well, it's my fault, and
Well, our game depends on other people being there, and that's disappointing when they're not there.
mm-hmm.
Quite heartily agree. It's just disappointing. You kind of wonder, okay, and then you have to figure out why. But that's for reflection and going, okay, I should have called them up and made sure that they were going to be here. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but so yeah, if it happens more than a couple times, either something's wrong with your game and you have to figure that out. Oh, you're so good. And
That I think that's the reason why I asked the question is that very thing there. When it happens and you have no context. You said everybody beat. Well, you and I haven't run into it in real time, but you and I have run into pretty close to an empty table tons of times online. In other
Yeah,
words, you and I plan on get together with a group of people, and when the time comes, nobody's here but the chickens, so to speak.
yeah,
You and me and the
yeah,
gatepost,
yeah.
and
The,
that
the old hen roosting right there and waiting for the rooster to crow.
right. So when that happens, when we are the when the empty table occurs, and is nobody else there, we do have to reconsider. But I guess my point for bringing it up and my reason for asking you about it in particular is how do you handle it when you kind of realize that it was you, that it was something you did. I think I told you that my nickname Commander Clueless was earned honestly because I set events in motion for some major things to happen at the same moment, and
Ah.
they couldn't because I couldn't be all three places at the same time. And in particular, now go ahead. I'm going to wrap myself out now, so everybody take your notes. This will be the one time. No,
No, no, no. Be like Trump was last night at the roast. He says, "You know how we have to say some deprecating sentences about ourselves."
right,
You
right.
know? Yeah,
Well, well,
and he said,
Drudenfuss has joined us. Hello, Drudenfuss. Where's my bell? Drudenfuss has joined us and has noted that sometimes an empty table occurs online because you didn't actually get solid commitments because it was an online event and everybody said yes tentatively, but nobody committed, and therefore an empty table can happen, out of pure happenstance. Everybody couldn't make it at the same time. But I was about to rat on myself. Here's what happened. I was at the time married, and my family lives back in Colorado, and so to go and visit family was to take time from California, jump into a back then it was a Tupperware van. My spouse was big in the Tupperware business, so we had Tupperware vans almost every year. And so we drove the Tupperware van all the way to Colorado and had a good time. But I happened to plan it exactly on the same day as what had been my regular Friday group. We had always gotten together on Fridays, and we rotated hosts because we had several families with kids, and so sometimes it was our week and sometimes it was somebody else's week. Well, that happened to be the week that was supposed to be at my house, and another friend of mine was graduating from college and had invited me specifically to come to his college
"Graduation."
graduation ceremony because he didn't have his family and him were not very close, and so he didn't have any relatives that were going to be there. So he's kind of hoping that I would be there, and I committed that yes, indeed, I would be at that. And as we are driving across state line, I get a phone call from the first of the cataclysms, which was the Friday group that had fallen out several times over the months before. They'd scheduled, yeah, we can play, and then nobody could or whatever. I got the call. We're all sitting in your driveway. Where are you? And that week was actually there's a total of 9 of them. That when we played as a big group, we had 9 players. All 8 of them were at my house at the same weekend while I'm on my way out of state. And then about 10 o'clock at night, I got a phone call from that buddy of mine. He had decided that since I didn't show up, him and Jack Daniels and Jim Beam and a couple of others were going to get together. And so he was in absolutely rare form, and he explained to me that I was an idiot and that I was clearly Commander Clueless. Of all the military men he knew in the all the folks that had been in the military that he knew, I was the least responsible. Had a hard time with that word that night, I remember, and I became Commander Clueless from that point on.
I never knew that story.
I don't tell it. It is not my most shining moment. But the irony was in that particular case, I had made even a worse faux pas, and that was that uh, the family, my wife and I decided that since Dave Peterson didn't travel much, we should have him come along with us. And so Dave got preferential treatment because he got to go with us, and all of my other buddies didn't even get notification that I was going to be gone. So yeah, it was horrible. It was my fault. So
I can understand.
so that was a case where
Yeah.
it was the empty table was my fault. It was my table that was empty because I wasn't there to fill it. So
Uh, my new thing is calendars.
what? The new calendars are new. I never.
Well,
What is a calendar? I'm not sure what you mean.
well, every year I get this calendar, and so now I'm filling it in. If I have a appointment 6 months from now, I fill that in on the appropriate month and the time and the date and where it is and who I'm seeing.
That's impressive. That no, I know calendars exist. That was what got me in a lot of trouble was the fact that a calendar exists, and that's why I think I told you some months ago I got rid of the standard concept of the calendar and renamed all the days of the week. Do you remember that I told you about that?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So just for a refresher, since this is for the millions. So the world of Nycos RPG, actually not the game world, but in my personal life, the days of the week names never really meant much to me. I've always been somewhat of a lone wolf in terms of the style of work I like to do. I've been an air traffic controller. There's nobody that sits on your shoulder and tells you what you have to do, and that's that condition. They want you to know what you're doing. So I was an air traffic controller. I've been a microwave antenna installer. You can't have anybody but you up on that little ladder, putting that silly thing on the side of the building or attaching it to that tower. I've been electronics technician and all kinds of different jobs, but all of them I've been pretty much autonomous in the work environment. So I've never been a person who needed to follow a 9 to 5 calendar until I worked for the corporate world. I was the marketing director for Gamma, the Game Manufacturers Association, and I was the tournament store liaison for Konami for a bunch of years for the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card brand. And in those cases, I did have to use a calendar. But after I left that and went back into what I call private life, I changed the days of the week. So, for example, Sunday and Monday are 2 days of the week that I just named them both the same because they're really both the same to me, which is Mondays and Sundays are fun days. Then Tuesday, of course, as we know on Nikos, is Tuesday is News Day. Wednesday is Friends Day. Thursday, I recently changed to Stores Day because it's when I focus on the events that I'm building for the game stores that I work with. And then Friday is My Day, and Saturday is Matter Day. So that's when I do volunteer work on Saturdays generally. So, but we also now have games groups on Saturdays, so that's changed a bit. But people say that's not fair. You've got Sunday and Monday as 2 fun days a week, and I said, yeah, that's because my life's twice as fun as anybody else's. But
Besides, on Monday night is my game with you, our game with you.
yes, yes, yes. And for those that are following along on the Discord, the days of the week are annotated onto the files that are theirs on the Discord for keeping their notes. So uh, Monday is known as Strangers in a Strange Land. Tuesday is the Skiff Born because they're operating from an airship. Then Saturday is the Voyages of the Ark and I, which is our adventurers going into the southern hemisphere, discovering the mysteries of an unmapped, uncharted world. And then Heralds of the Change is our Sunday group. So, and as I've said before, if you're interested in becoming part of one of our games and you're in the local area, Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California is where we play. Their logo's up here in the corner of the screen, and so we're there on Mondays and Tuesdays from 6 until 10 p.m. Pacific time, right before I come on air, and then on Saturday and Sunday, if you're a member of our Patreon program as a supporter, you get access to the weekend games. So Saturday at 9 a.m. and Sunday at 1 p.m. And those both are played in the Pacific time zone, of course. But those are both played on the Discord server. So there we are, Drudenfuss. I know that you just recently became a member of the Discord, so I'd love to have you if you can swing either one of those. So,
Yes.
alrighty. Uh, we're at the half an hour mark. This is where I wanted to get to. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about the empty table, Gene?
No, not really. As I say, when we had an empty table with, I had an identical twin who was a marvelous storyteller, and she would just start playing with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because it was like at a convention, so it was like the open gaming room.
Right.
So then those that are walking around looking for a game see a game going on with only two people or one player and one DM. They said, "Is there room for more?" My sister look at them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that.
Let me let me count the empty chairs. I think so.
Well, you should get if you get a chance to go look at the big idea video that I put up some weeks ago, where I talked about the very concept of the one of the merits, one of the real positives about the gaming community as a whole is that we are absolutely inclusive. We don't we don't we don't
No,
let things keep us from playing. We're not going to wonder about what color hair you have or who you voted for in the last election. We just want to play the games.
yep, it could
Alrighty,
be.
well I'm gonna actually wrap this up short only because I did just finish putting up I think what will be one of the most important videos I've done yet. If you guys haven't got a chance to check it out, Gene and Drudenfuss, you might want to look into the video that I just did. It just published this afternoon, and
On
it's
YouTube.
yep, yep.
Okay.
It's the first roleplay roulette test. So
Ooh,
I actually set up and ran the roleplay roulette mechanism. Of course, I was running there. That's part of how I ended up thinking about the empty table because I didn't have any even random viewers hop on and join me during that. And it made me realize that sometimes you have to still soldier on, as you're saying. You go ahead and start playing because eventually somebody else will walk in the room. I think that's one of my favorite. I think I told you this joke before, Gene. Do you know how to keep yourself from getting lost if you get in the forest? You make sure you bring with you a deck of cards. That way, if you start feeling like you might not know where you are, you sit down in the forest and start playing solitaire. As you're sitting there playing solitaire, eventually someone's going to come along and tell you to put the 10 on the jack, and then you can ask for directions.
you
Because
might be.
nobody playing solitaire ever has been able to finish the game without somebody going, "What? Well, you can move that over there."
Yeah, the eternal kibitzer.
Absolutely. Alrighty, guys. I will see you next time. Thank you again for being here. If you haven't yet, like, follow, share, all of that. And I would ask the two of you and anybody else who's watching, please share this video with others. We need to get more people to know so that no one has to suffer an empty table ever again. But that's one of my pledges is I want to make it so that everybody has a game to go to every time they want to play. All right, I'm out of here. I'm Jonathan. Thank you again, Gene, for joining me. We'll talk again soon. See you, everybody.
Okay, can you get the Discord for just a bit?
Of course.